Hey, it's Chris, Liege Games. Don't want to pay secondary market prices for Soul? Good news, it's coming back to crowdfunding. What do you need to know in this 1 to 5 player space-faring, sun-delving, Euro-esque game? Let's talk. So why is Soul so sought after? Why have people been trying to pick it up on the secondary market? Let me tell you everything you need to know in order to figure out whether or not this game is right for you, because it's got several unique elements, several twists in terms of how you may expect things to interact, or layers that are there without having significant overhead or significant complexity in the nature of all of the dynamics that need to work together. Because you can do that, right? And I'm going to make a comparison right here at the beginning. If you like games akin to something like Concordia or Hansa Teutonica, it gives me that sort of vibe where you're only having 3 different actions that you're going to be taking on your turn, right? That's not that many. How many different things can you do? How much nuance can you can have a lot. Let's talk about those 3 things, what you need to know about this game, how this game is played a little bit, and some thoughts on it as we go. Now, what you have here is you have your sideboard. This is going to be where all of the victory points are scored, as well as the countdown tracker for the end of the game. And what this is essentially it's a dial in 2 different ways. Along the outside, you're going to be scoring your momentum. So momentum are your equivalent victory points. More momentum, further you are away from the sun, the further you can project yourself ship-wise as the sun's exploding. So you want to be the one with the most. Makes sense thematically incorporated? Great. This little Tower of Doom, we'll call it, in the death spiral in the middle. It starts out at 13, and it's going to gradually decrease every time you draw a solar flare card, because that means the sun is getting more unstable. And when it gets to 0, that is when the game ends. And so that is the cool, tricky part right there. And you can see that you can score a lot of momentum very quickly. And now we get to sort of the game board right here. And this has 3 different factions on it in a 3-player setup, partiality in terms of where the game is at right now. And I'm going to utilize this to illustrate some of the nuance, the 3 different actions that you're going to be taking, and why it's different in how it operates to give it the depth, the variability, the replayability without taking up this much space on your table or on your shelf, because that's important nowadays. So what are the 3 main actions that you're going to be taking in this game, right? They're relatively straightforward. You're just going to be moving, you're going to be converting, and you're going to be activating. I mean, those are relatively straightforward, right? Okay, let's break those down so you can get a good sense of things. So on this board, you're going to see that we have 3 main ships. These 3 main ships are the 3 player character ships. They're going to be traversing around the outside in various spots, and they are actually equidistant. I'm going to move the green one here off the board a little bit so you can see it, and then you have the blue one up here. And so as you take your turn, this is not the move action, but this is important. You can actually literally walk away from the game and know whose turn it is 20 minutes later if all of your memories are erased, a la Men in Black, because you can look and see, just by knowing the game rules, the one that has the furthest gap between them, that next one is the one that goes. Because as you end your turn, you move your ship 1 space forward. That also plays right into the first action of moving. You have 4 different buildings that you're going to be building and converting. But what are you converting them from? Well, you have a plethora of these little shippies. We'll call them little shippies right here. And you can see that they're variously scattered around the areas of the sun at various depths and various locations. And what you're going to be doing with these ships, whoops, that one's not a ship. These ships that you're going to be utilizing is on your turn, you can spend your move action to place them in one of the 4 spots surrounding wherever your ship is. Now you may go, okay, Chris, that makes a lot of sense. What I'm doing in this game is I'm delving down to the center of the sun, trying to harness the energy, trying to harness those solar flares in order to get momentum. So why on earth would you ever want to place this one way, 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 way out here on the outer track, Chris? That makes no sense. That seems worthless, useless. No, it's not. Let me tell you why. Because the other element of this game is you're going to be having this deck. And depending on the number of players, you're going to have a various number of colors that are utilized in this deck. And now this deck is only set up right now for 2 players. And so it has the solar flares right here, the red cards. And then you also have the blues and the greens. And what you're going to be doing in these card situations is you're going to be assigning 1 asymmetric power to each of these colors. So as you draw these cards from the deck, they're going to correlate or correspond to a certain power if you choose to keep that card, because that's really where the benefit of drawing the cards comes from, that you can utilize in a tactical nature and tactical strategy to adapt what you want to do on your turn as the 4th potential option on your turn. Now, most of them optionally mitigate or change the rules or break them in some way in order to give you an advantage to use that card as a one-time use bonus. We'll talk about that more in a second. Let's go back to the move though. You see that I placed these down here. And so when I draw one of those solar flares, why you would ever want to have one in the outer portion here is if you build one of your various structures, right? One of these structures, one of the 4 structures that you can build here. Let's actually get all 4 on camera here, as you can see here now. Then if those structures are built out here, you can't build all of them. You can only build 3 of the 4 out there. They automatically get free activation for you. And free activation is not a minor trivial thing in this game. There's a lot of activation, and that's also one of the twists we'll get to in a minute when we talk about that action in particular and why that twist is a little bit of a very unique, but also you've seen it elsewhere in other situations in other ways, shapes, and forms, so you'll recognize it when I get to it. So on your turn, place as many as you can, potentially up to 3 move actions. Placing counts as 1 action, and then moving them 1 space counts as an action. Moving them 1 space this way counts as an action, however you want to do that. That is the basic. Just the last part of moving is if you have one here in the center right here, I want to jettison it into the center of the core of the sun, then I can actually get momentum, score on this other track that I mentioned right here for the victory points, and then get to draw these cards. And if you draw cards, you get solar flares, you get extra momentum. As a side note here, I didn't even mention that as you build stuff, the more rings that you have stuff in, you get extra move actions. So your move action becomes exponentially stronger on your little player sheet here as you go along. The more layers you have buildings in, the more actions you get, the more move actions you get, and the more powerful your move actions become as you go along. So that all makes sense, right? That's the basic move. Makes sense, no big deal. Chris, very simple, very straightforward. Let's go into the second action of the building, the creating. This is how I remember it. Creating and converting, because that's essentially what you're doing when you're building, as I mentioned, one of these 4 little structures. And so these 4 structures are very unique. They're slightly different, but they manage your 2 main resources in the game. One of your main resources, well, you've already talked about, you've already learned, you've already listened, are the little ships. You have to have ships to do the conversions. You have to have ships to do the activations. So you need to have ships, right? How do you get more ships? Well, that's one of the buildings you can build. We'll talk about that in a second. But the main, more important thing is, Chris, I want to get to the center of the sun. I want to get more energy. I want to get more resources. I want to get more ships. I want to get more momentum. I want to win the game. I got to get closer to the center of the sun, because as you go deeper into the center of the sun, the cost is higher, but also the reward is higher. And what do I mean by that? Well, you can see that I have various buildings built at different levels of the sun, layers of the sun here. The higher you are, the lower you are, I guess, in that sense, actually, the higher the reward. And so what happens is if you build one down here, you're going to get more reward for momentum that this thing harnesses. You're going to get more reward of this one for building your little ships. You're going to get more reward of getting more energy with this one. But in order to do so, well, like I said, you have to convert your little ships that I've already mentioned. Now, converting, that's why the C and C, create and convert, because you're creating the buildings out of converting the little ships. But in order to convert the little ships, you have to have them in particular arrangements. And that's where the tricky part comes in, because not only do you have to have them in the right arrangement, you have to have a space that you can build them in, because you can't build where someone else has already built. The first thing you're going to be building, you can see that I have a few of these like here. These are little gates. These are the things that allow you to dive deeper into the sun. You have to have a gate that travels from one area to the next area in order to go from one depth to another. Now, the tricky spin part on this one is you can use anybody's gate. You can use anybody's gate, folks. It's a door. It opens for everybody. But if you use somebody else's gate, they get an energy. That's the second resource that we're talking about. That are these little red cubes that you're going to be utilizing. And you know what? You don't need to deluxify it. Red cubes work great in this game, so don't overthink it. So that's the twist on the gate side of things. Not a big twist, not a big deal, Chris. You're going, okay, well, still, why is this? Okay, where is the, okay, I'm getting there. Second thing that you're going to be building, right? You've got the energy nodes. So you've got these energy nodes that are sitting right here. The energy nodes have to be built by having two little ships with a space in between. And so then you take the two outside ships and you put the energy node where it was in the middle. Boom, simple, straightforward. The reason that this action is important is because these little ships that I just utilized, right? I don't lose them. This is going into the other aspect of the things I haven't explained yet. You have a reserve and you have a hold. So your hold is going to be ships that you can take directly from when you produce and put them on the board. And when you move or use that action, you can take them right there. The production is going to be taking them from the reserve, putting them into the hold so you can utilize them when you need to deploy them at a later time. So you need to have them in order to utilize them. And this right here doesn't destroy them, doesn't put them in the reserve, it puts them in the hold so you can then put them out next turn again if you want to. And that's the important difference, because the last action that we're going to talk about here is the activate. The activate is the one that you use these and they get destroyed, and not destroyed. If you hurl them into the sun, they're out of the game. But if they destroy them, then they go back to your reserve. And then you're going to have to build them to go into your hold, and then the hold to the board. And so that's the difference between the main two mechanisms of actions here, between the creating and the activating. Now, the other thing is you can't have more than one in a space, whether it's yours or someone else's. The other portion of this is the further down these buildings are, the more they're going to cost to build. The further down they are, we'll talk about this more in the activation. Again, that's the high risk, high reward. The other three structures that we've mentioned, okay, you've got the little gate. Gates have to have one here and one here. And so then I can put a purple gate right here by removing these two. Okay, very straightforward. Next thing here, you have the foundry. The foundry gets put in one of these spots because you have two that are above it. It can go in either one of these spots right here. And then this is the thing that's building those ships, putting them from the reserve to the hold. The energy over here is the thing that's getting you energy, because you're going to need energy to activate these buildings in the first place in the next action that you have. So the last building that you have are these towers. These towers are victory point towers. If you can build them, and again, they have to have an arrangement of 3 in a row. And so you would be building one there, and we'll just move this over here. So if I had all 3 of these here, you take the last one out there, and then it would be built there. So you can see kind of what happens in that regard. And then we get into the activate phase. The activate phase, again, is going to give you a little bit of a twist. This is the piggybacking activation. And the twist comes not only in the layer of level that it's in, but who and how the rewards are going to be divided. And this is where it's unique. This is where people like it. This is where thinking comes in really handy. Again, you're going to go, Chris, let's say actually, let's switch these positions. Let's say green's right here, right? Green's over there. There's nothing green over there. What am I going to do, Chris? I can't get all the way around to here. I can't get all the way over to here before I'm going to start to get some green stuff. So I am going to have to use other people's buildings. I'm going to have to activate. I'm going to have to go through other people's gates in order to do that. And the benefit of doing that is you can use them and get the main bonus that you get normally, right? Like if I want to produce 5 energy from the energy building, I can. However, here's the piggybacking thing. Depending on what level you are, as you go deeper in the level, the main reward is higher, but there's a bonus reward. If you are not the building's owner can subsequently take that activation action as well. They have to be able to pay for it. Obviously, they just don't get it for free, but if they can pay for it, they can utilize it as well. Or if you're building ships, they can just get the ships as well. So they, can piggyback off of your action if they're using your structure in the first place. So that's why it behooves you to have structures all over in different levels, in different places, even the gates, in order to maximize the resource return that you're getting from other players in addition. Now, activating, again, you can only activate one type, but you can activate more of one type on a turn. So I could activate this one and this one and this one if I had my purple ships in all 3 of those areas. I cannot activate more than one type of building, though. Makes sense. Okay. So right now, this is relatively straightforward. Chris, you haven't talked about the cards. How do you get the cards? So I've mentioned these cards. These cards are actually going to be drawn. And so what you're going to be doing, this is probably the least amount of perfect information in this game. The rest of it is all just splayed out in front of you. As you're going to be drawing these cards, you draw them depending on the layer that you are either building or activating in, right? If you are building and activating deeper in the layers, you're going to be drawing more cards. And so as you draw these cards, things may happen. If you draw a solar flare, which I'm not drawing any of right now, look at that. That's amazing. Where are all the solar flares? It's like he stacked the deck, right? This is the countdown. So when you draw one of these, then the Tower of Doom goes one step closer to the center. But when you draw one of these, right, it activates the outer ring, free resources, right? It brings down the counter of doom by 1, but it also says, hey, hoarders, if you're hoarding too much energy, it's going to cause a disruption and you lose. If you have more than 13 energy, divide by 2, round down, round up. It doesn't matter. You lose. So you got to be careful. You can't just, stack up Ticket to Ride resources and then go hee-haw at the end. So the number of cards that you draw, though, is dependent on the layer. So the further down, if you're in this inner ring, for example, you're going to draw 3 cards, 2 cards, 1 card. You're not going to draw any cards throughout here. And so these cards not only are going to be potentially like the solar flares, they're going to do that, but these cards are all going to have individual abilities assigned to them. And this is where the variability and the replayability comes in, because these 3 actions, you're going to go, okay, I can master that. I can get a little bit of sense of that. I can, understand the strategy behind that. But there is another deck of cards over here that I have not even talked about that has a good number of each of these, 7 different abilities just for the blue cards potentially. That is going to alter, change, or even break the rules of the game that you're normally playing in this situation, and you choose one of them to assign to the blue card for that game. I assign another different one from a different set of green as well, and they all do different things. Perform additional convert action, where the sun divers, that's the ships, and are recalled instead of sacrificed. Remember that thing? Remember when I said you're going to activate? Well, instead of activating and losing the ships, they just get recalled back into your hold instead. Immediately activate a station after converting it. Let's shuffle them up here a second. And let's say you draw 3 cards, right? Because you just built one of these inner momentum towers. So you draw 3 cards and you go, okay, Chris, I got one of everything. I didn't even plan that. I didn't even stack the deck, or did I? You activate what the solar flare does. Great, you do that. Then you get to decide, do I want the solar flare? Do I want the green card, or do I want the blue card? Because the other thing I didn't mention is the solar flares actually get signed an ability as well. And so all 3 of these cards have the potential ability to modify, adapt, or be able to break the rules of the game in the first place, that you can use as a one-time off to play this card. And so every time you draw cards, you're going to have the ability to do this. So you're not just going to hold on to this. You're going to want to play this quickly and appropriately and tactically when it behooves you the most. Because it's like Mario Kart, right? If you hit the little bonus item square and you're already full, you can't take another one. Now you can discard the one you have and take one of the other ones. Like if I had only gotten these 2, because I only drew 2 cards, and then the next time I drew this card, I could take this one and discard whichever one I kept here, but I can't keep more than one. That's where the variability and the replayability comes in. That's where the depth of the tactics and strategy comes in, because getting a blue card at the right time, getting a red card at the right time, getting a green card, whatever you want to do is going to offer different levels of depth. And these are all significantly different when you play with one or the other. Now they say, in terms of increasing complexity, blue and green are the simplest. So that's why I have these out here, for example. They also have red, which have some take that. So if you want some take that, they say include the red as one of the options. If you don't want red, if you don't want interaction in terms of the I bash you, right? As a Euro player, you don't have to use that color. You get to choose what colors you use. And you know what? If you don't even want to just choose randomly, you can just look through and say, hey, I want to use this one. This looks cool. Hey, I want to use this one. We haven't used this one. And it's 7 of those for each different color, essentially. Maybe except for red. I think there's a few less. But that's a lot of options. You can do the combinatorial in the calculator later to see how many that is. But that's a lot. So that is Soul in a nutshell. Does that make sense? So what are you going to like about this game, and what won't you like about this game? First, let's talk about the things you may like. The things you may like, well, like I said, the actions that you're taking are relatively straightforward. It's your manipulation of the actions that is really the important side of things. So if you can outmaneuver, outthink, and outplay other people, this game is going to allow you to do that. There is not going to be a lot of randomness, a lot of chance. Even like I said, with the card deck of these cards pulling, there's still going to be mitigation possible, or how you utilize the cards as a possibility. And so that, doesn't play a large role in things overall. That's something that's really nice. And again, it's not a difficult game to learn. It's a much more difficult game to play well. It rewards repeated play. It rewards being on your toes on the game board. And if you like that sort of thing, if you like the Hansa, the Concordia-ish, that is, I feel strongly very similar in those ways. The actual game, I mean, I'm not going to say those are the same, but the feeling of this is there, but how I do it is what really matters, right? It's not the size of the dog in the fight, it's the size of the bark of the... You know what I'm saying, but that's where I'm going with that, essentially, right? What may you not like in this game? Well, like I said, the cards is probably going to be the number one thing. That's probably going to be right up there at the top of things. The end game scoring of it being whenever you draw enough of these flares, that's probably going to turn people off too. Is, like with some other pandemic-esque games where you have games where you're drawing and the timing of when these comes up is the most dependent. Yeah, that's highly variable. They might get stacked a little bit more towards the top. They might get stacked a little bit more towards the bottom. So you may not know exactly. I mean, you can see the sort of doomsday clock ticking down in front of you, but you're not going to ever have an exact. And so if you need one of those exacts, like I said, with 7 rounds to do this, this, and this, I only have 1 round, 2 rounds, 3 rounds left, that's going to bother you from this side of things. The other thing that I can see people not liking, again, going back to these cards and these powers, depending on your strategy, depending on how you like to play, if you're more of a builder, if you're more of an activator, if you like to do one slightly more differently than another person, some of these cards are going to force you to adapt in the powers that you have. And so you might want to have certain ones in there, and you might shuffle through them, leaf through them, and go, I don't want this one. I don't want this one. Like I said about the red cards, right? The more interactive, the more take that, you may not want those, or you may include those for your own purposes. But that's really where you're going to look. And the problem with it is, the first time you play, you're not going to have a good sense of, okay, how is this actually going to, how is this one actually, like, your planning is not necessarily of how you're setting up your engine going to work as well until you understand what role these cards play. In the first game or two, it's going to be a little bit trickier from that aspect. But it's clicking, and it'll click nicely once you get used to it. So what do I think of this game? I mean, you can tell this game doesn't need fancy blinged out stuff. It doesn't need any more deluxeification. This reminds me very much of Spirit Island in the sense that the gameplay holds. The gameplay stands up several years later, and that's also why the comparisons to Concordia, the comparisons to Hansa Teutonica, the reason why it's in demand, because this is more Euro optimization management with some tactical variability thrown in there with the cards, just enough to appease non-Euro people like me, but not enough to make Euro hardcore perfect information statisticians turned off. And it also just, it's kind of cool drawing these cards and having the timer slowly tick down. Do I build in the center and risk drawing another solar flare and getting closer to the end? Do I not, because I really need to get down there? Do I just sacrifice into the sun instead and get momentum that way so I can inch forward? Or do I activate the big times and risk activating someone else's in order to try and get the momentum that I need, even knowing that they might be able to activate right along with me and keep up with the Joneses through the bonus mechanism twist that I mentioned? That's the cool thing. That's the strategy. That's the tactical nature. That's why people like it. It gives those moments that make you feel really cool about saying, okay, haha, I just pulled off a really great combo, even with the fact that there's only 3 main actions that you're taking. And this is a game that exemplifies less is more. I don't need to choose from 7 different actions that each have 3 subsets of different things that I can do in order to have a more complex, a more thoughtful game without having too much analysis paralysis, and still intriguing and delighting both sides of the table in terms of Euro and non. And that's what this game does. That's why people like it. That's why you should be interested in it. Is it going to appeal to everybody? No, it's not. I mean, if you are just, not a Euro person, this isn't going to probably change your mind. but it also scales rather nicely. There is a cooperative variant as well if you prefer that, right? Like everyone has to have a certain number of momentum by the time that Doom ticker counts down. But mainly, this is a competitive game. There's a solo mode as well, but again, not touching on that. The main drive, the main focus of this game is competitive, and it is for a reason. Thematic incorporation, it works. Do I need thematic incorporation? No, but I can see how it's utilized. You sort of got Nero playing the fiddle while Rome burns, right? As you're sort of slowly orbiting around this outside, trying to gain momentum, at the same time feeling like you're treading water and hoping that you can get more than the person behind you or in front of you as you slowly watch the ticker count down and down and down until the end. And it happens like that. And I like game-ending conditions like this. In that sense, I like the unpredictable and the variable nature of the end game. It provides an additional layer of spice to this type of game that we don't often see as well. So that is Soul. If you're interested, it's back on crowdfunding. So give it a look-see. You won't have to pay secondary market prices if you're looking for it from that aspect of things already. So there you go. Thanks, Matt. Thanks for sending it to me so I could talk about it in the first place. There you go. My thoughts on Soul. Stay classy. Let me know what you think. Let me know if you're interested. Give it a look-see. Thanks for watching. Do the YouTube thing if you like this. More where this is coming from. I have a Patreon too, but click, whatever. Have a great day.